So if you think about it, if I never had land to incubate my idea, how am I ever going to go to the banks to tell them this is a successful business plan, right? So you have to prove financing all the time. So I had to go to them to say, I'm broke. I'm like broke enough to qualify for the loan, but then I have to also have a successful business plan. So how do you do that, right?
You're listening to the Transcendent Farmer Podcast with your host, Emily Brino. Welcome back, Transcendent Farmers, to episode 36 of the Transcendent Farmer Podcast. I'm really excited to be bringing this interview to you because it was actually recorded about 2 years ago. I am still making my way through recordings from 2024, which is so wild. And the timing of this could not have been any better. And you'll understand why a little bit later in the episode. But I'm currently recording from Moski's Coahuila. I feel like it's always good to update folks as to where I'm at in the world. And it's really cool, honestly. It's such a gift to be able to see the way that the landscape has been changing just in the last few weeks. I would say even just last week, we had our first rain. And the buds just started popping out of all of the trees. And then maybe 4 days later, suddenly it looks like you've got a full-size leaf on these trees. What's so interesting about being in this particular biome, and I've never lived in an arid, kind of more desert-like location before. So it's fascinating to me to know that all of these plants, they're soaking up this water from these very, very deep systems of water within the area. And what's really cool is that where we're located, we're right up against these beautiful mountains. And so all of the water that comes down from there comes right into the community. And people don't actually have to pay for access to the municipal water supply. Basically, they just have a one-time fee that they pay, and then that's it. And so most folks will get their water supply, at least for drinking, from just like local water purification spots. And it's really cheap. You know, you'll fill up a big jug of water for 10 pesos or so. But then the rest, everything that comes out of your tap, everything that you use for the toilet and the shower, you don't have a monthly utility bill for that. And I just find that really unique. I think that's one of the things that makes this town particularly interesting is its abundant water supply. So there are a couple of themes that I wanted to have you pay attention to as you listen to this interview today that I think are going to be really relevant for what you are striving to do in terms of getting access to land and capital to start your first farm. This is the first and only interview that I've done with someone who has a background in real estate and also farming. And I find that super unique. It's, I think, one of the rarest combinations of professional backgrounds that I've seen. And I wish that there were more people like Mhonpaj who were doing this, honestly, because there is such a big knowledge barrier and gap between the realm of real estate and farming, which seems very odd to me, considering those things kind of go hand in hand, I think, in a lot of ways. So the first thing is really just to remind you to trust your passion and allow it to lead you as it relates to your own farm business development journey. You're going to hear this when Mhonpaj talks about her passion for health and how maybe going down all of these other paths, she ended up coming back to the thing that really lit her up. She also talks about the importance of family support and the roles that a lot of her family members have played over the years in providing labor to the farm and how that changed over time and the changes that needed to happen in terms of the business model itself, making adjustments as that support kind of ebbed and flowed. And so what came to mind to me as it related to that, this is a theme that's been coming up in other areas of my life and I think is just worth sharing, is this concept of non-attachment as it relates to farming. This is something that is very common and a big part of yogic philosophy, something that, I'm always very passionate about and often try to integrate into what I share with you. So there's this term, and I'm sure that I'm going to butcher it, but it's aparigraha in yogic philosophy. Basically, it's this practice of engaging fully in life without clinging to outcomes, possessions, or emotions. It means acting without expectation, cultivating inner peace and equanimity by letting go of desire to control situations, ultimately reducing suffering and freeing the mind to focus on the present. There's a lot related to this idea of non-attachment, but also this process, I think, of business development in general. And this is something that it's so interesting to me how we will go into a bank, we'll create a business plan, we have this whole model, we have all of these projections about what we think is going to happen, what we anticipate being able to tap into with a market. And then, of course, we get into it and everything changes, right? Lots of circumstances, things that we couldn't have foreseen pop up. I feel like in the same way that when I'm building a website, I teach people to think about it as this living, breathing entity. You're constantly shifting, updating content, iterating as you get additional clarity around who is it that we're serving, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and what is it that these people need to hear so that they understand this is for you. It's the same thing with farming, identifying your market channels, figuring out what your best role is within the business, what things do you need to delegate. And then, of course, you have this whole other factor, which is risk management and managing what's happening with the weather, right? So practicing non-attachment as it relates to farming is absolutely essential. And this was a theme that actually came up as part of the conversation. And while it wasn't named explicitly, it's something that I think could be really helpful for you to also pay attention to is this idea of risk management. Not only diversification within the crops that you put in the ground, but also thinking about your educational attainment and continuing education to increase your income if you have an off-farm job. Another piece that can be really helpful as you go into this process is finding a way to calculate your hourly rate or doing some kind of a cost analysis to compare your different market channel options against each other. So for example, if I know that selling at the farmer's market on a rainy day is going to earn me $3 an hour versus selling this other product directly to these markets or through, I don't know, maybe there's like a grant funded project, or maybe I have a direct client where the food shelf is buying from me directly and I just have to drop off the product. And I can make maybe $30 an hour on both a rainy and sunny day in that market channel. There's lots to weigh against each other in terms of figuring out over time, what is this costing you? And one of the things that's so challenging is that everyone's geography is different. Depending on where your farm is located, your travel costs, your fuel costs, depending on how far away you live from where some of these buyers are. What's so interesting is that I'm working on a project right now that's calculating the return on investment of a particular farmer's market food hub model within the state of Minnesota. And I feel like my biggest takeaway from that project has been that you want to keep the costs associated with getting your product into the hands of the customer as low as possible. Make it as simple as possible for someone to buy and receive this product, whether that has to do with finding out about the product, whether that has to do with the delivery pieces, the pickup prices, whatever administrative costs are associated with the entire process. Keep those as low as possible because ultimately that's going to affect your margin in the end. The last two things that I wanted to emphasize with this is the way that Mhonpaj talks about climate change and the way that this is affecting farmers and their crops and making it a very challenging thing to navigate on the day-to-day. And then lastly, she talks about the local food purchase assistance program, which was a really big program that was funded through federal dollars, the USDA, across the country, and then it made its way to different states through a competitive process, and each state had the opportunity to refine and design that program for their specific context. The funding for that, I believe, has ended. However, the state of Minnesota just recently launched a program that it has a different name, something more related to food security, but essentially it's like LFPA, the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program 2.0, in my opinion. I'm going to make sure to have a link to that grant funding source in the show notes for this episode in case you are interested in learning a little bit more about it or you're looking for a funding source for your farm. And of course, if you would like any grant writing assistance, this is something that I am expanding into a lot more right now. I recently took second place in a pitch competition to scale the work that I'm doing for farmers to help them find funding opportunities and write grant applications in a fraction of the time that it would normally. So I've built a lot of systems that are very functional, but very high touch. And my goal is to work with this partner to be able to automate and build the systems so that a lot more farmers can have access to the kind of work that I'm doing. If you are interested in becoming a beta tester for when I'm ready to launch this software or application, whatever that end product ends up being, definitely drop us a line so that we can put you on a wait list for that. You can send us a message at hello@mezclada.co. It's just an email at hello, HELLO, @mezclada.co, and we will get you added to the list. Okay, with that, let's get into today's episode. I have a very lovely guest today. I think you guys will really enjoy the conversation. I am with Mhonpaj Lee, who is a realtor and broker, which is part of Inspire Access Realty. She's also an organic farmer who runs Mhonpaj Garden, preserving Hmong herbs. I always like to start my conversations off just having you share a little bit about your cultural background and upbringing and how that has shaped who you are today.
Yes, definitely. Growing up, we were always farming and lifestyle, and I didn't know that we had any less. Like living in poverty, you just didn't know that you grew up in the projects or that our parents, they had a lot of us, so we had to farm, and that was a way of life. So we would freeze all of our produce in the winter time, and we would bake them in like Ziplocs and blanch them. And I just never knew of any other diet until going really to college and eating college food. I think, to be honest, like my parents didn't really take us out, other than like when my sisters were dating boyfriends and we get to go out on their dates with them and if they get to go out eat. I think that was like my first time eating a burger. But yeah, so food to me, like growing up and just our lifestyle was very frugal. And my dad just encouraged us to do so many activities. And I remember him like deterring us from becoming farmers or coming back into farming because it was like a poor man's job, and very hot, and you were just working hard, laborious hours. So he wanted all of us to go get our college degrees and to have like a better life than him, for sure. So yeah, it was like I think being so young, my parents were so entrepreneur that like we were not only cooking Hmong food for sale on the weekends, like at flea markets, but we all had to learn how to cook. I think I was probably the worst cook out of the family. But like I remember my job was to make dumplings, and then my brother's job was to like learn how to cook Hmong sausages, and my other sister had to learn how to make like curry noodle, so like each of us were assigned a dish. And I don't know of any other family that probably was like more workaholic than us. There was just like no rest, and so I was like, definitely, I was telling my sister, I was like, I wonder that's why like girls get married, because they were just trying to escape all of this, right? But for us, my dad encouraged us to like be in sports. We were in like Boy Scouts. I was in, we traveled all over. Like we would fundraise with nonprofits and then go to like Thailand and France. And so even though we were younger, my dad he really just kind of like farmed and then helped chauffeur us around. And our cars were constantly like broken down. But yeah, so growing up, it was a very humble beginning for sure. And it taught us a lot. Like, I think the work ethic we have today is a form of like years and years of, just not giving up. And he just believed in us, like having dad believe in us more than we believe in ourselves, and definitely keeping us accountable. Like I remember not wanting to finish my master's degree. I was like, oh gosh, like there's no point. I didn't get the job that I wanted. And he's like, where's your certificate? So I was like, okay, fine. I'll go back and finish my thesis. So you could put it in. He kept like little files of all of our accomplishments. And before he passed away 2 years ago, he had handed me all of like my tooth and like all my little like, even my perfect attendance from like kindergarten, and then he kept like little photos of us, and he made like scrapbooks in these like vinyl. And so he always he like for all 8 of us, like he had little, and so it taught me about like journaling and reflecting. Like he always was writing. I think sometimes my mom's like, "What are you writing in there? Like we're so busy at the farm, like you're gonna go type." And I bought him like a typewriter, and he wasn't willing to like move into computers. But yeah, it was just interesting that, you had a dad that like just believed in you more.
Yeah, that's so special. So you were one of the only people who I've met who is both in farming and real estate. And I'm just curious to know, how did that happen?
It was like crazy, actually. I like decided after trying to shop for land, like all of my realtors were like, I had a loan that like you had to get denied to get it. It's like a guaranteed loan, right? So they're like, we need a pre-approval, and I don't have a pre-approval because it's a guaranteed loan, and you have to submit the purchase agreement. So I'm sure the realtors were like, this lady is not going to buy land with us. After shopping for like 2 to 5 years, organic farmland is like hard to find, and like you have to find it to be transitioned will take like years to transition. So luckily, the lot that we found here in Hugo was transitioned, and so then I ended up becoming my own real estate agent. I was like, okay, well, why don't I go get my license, and I will start looking for land myself. So on the side, I learned how to like sell houses, and first time home buyer, I found out about all these cool programs, and then I kept sharing it with everyone. And then I remember my sister and brother-in-law, they were investors then, and so my very first project was really helping them like buy and sell some of their real estate and like looking for the right lots for them. And then I got them, and I told them about new construction. I was like, oh, on the east side here, there's lots are less expensive, and you could, maybe build out. And I was able to connect them to one of my lenders. So they got one of their very first house through one of the lenders. I connected them, and being a contractor, it's hard to get that. So yeah, I found my lot out here, and I think my husband then, he's like, hey, maybe we should buy in Hugo. And I like wrote my first purchase agreement, like I represented myself, and I was like, some of this is wetland, so I don't really think it's worth it. So we negotiated it down, and they're like, so who's saying all this? And I'm like, well, technically I represent myself, and I think, you should come down in the price. And it was kind of funny because usually you have a realtor represent you who could kind of carry the news, right? So it was interesting, and it was just really rewarding to be able to like purchase my house, and it's like so empowering to like be the representative, and then to go through the process, and then to be the farmer. And then I was like, oh, a few years ago, I was like, well, no one wants to help farmers and farmsteads because it's like it takes so long, and people get impatient, and they want the return of value immediately. So then I was like, well, why don't I become a broker, right? So then 2 years ago, I was like, well, let me go back for my license. And I slept on it, and I like called one of my girlfriends. I was like, what should I call like the brokerage? And her and I like we were like doing these brainstorming branding sessions, and I was like, I think I want to call it Inspire, because everybody that I helped never thought that they can achieve that goal. So like I've placed some of the farmers out in Princeton where he just wanted to have some chickens, and we built him like a house, and his 5 little kids and him, like they moved out there. And it was so empowering. And one of my first builds was getting someone out of the east side where they had no parking, and they had like 8 siblings. I think they had 9. I forget how many with their grandma. They're living in like a 3 bedrooms, and I built them their first house for $350,000, and that was like expensive back then, but now it's considered cheap with the interest rate. And I think that was so empowering to me that like I was able to transform like a family's life of like the fact that because they were working manufacturing job, they didn't think they could ever have something new or something big enough. So I just thought, wow, if I could do this and help a few families, like think about what I could do for their whole entire legacy, like once their kids grow up. So yeah, so my vision there, yeah, so being a realtor was initially I was always working something part-time. I was like a Hmong interpreter, and then I worked for Asian Economic Development Association. And I think while all of it just kind of circled me back to like health, because I guess I was really, there's this underlying theme of like me just getting frustrated with like the fact that Western medicine was great. You need a combination of that, but then it was always like for vitamin D, they gave you a pill instead of telling you to bake yourself in the sun. And so there was something in me, and especially my El Salvador trip, like really opened my eyes when I saw Orhan Hoshino as like an engineer who came back to the community, who gave back, and then he taught them how to build farmsteads that used methane gas to build community again, and they were able to like feed their communities with their food. And some of these people were living in cardboard boxes along the train track, so it was really dangerous because the train would come through, but that was the only area the government would let them live.
Wow.
And that just re-inspired me from that trip in college. And I never thought I would be a realtor, to be honest. Like, I never thought I would be in this career from a political science, health fitness major to going into my master's in leadership. So I really thought I was going to go unionized interpreter services to have access to medical interpreting for those who came to the hospitals. And so Hennepin County Medical Center is like the only one in the state of Minnesota that's in union. And I thought that the career was so important when people came and they didn't speak the language. And some of it was using children to interpret. So we put in some policies in place to like have funding and reimbursement for interpreter services. So I was a huge advocate for allowing, like, even now with land access, I felt like that's the issue. Like, even though you're a really good farmer and you're really productive at downtown St. Paul, I realized all the farmers were still renting land. And so I was like, well, there's a lot of land still available that how do I get some people who are really passionate, who are growing food, especially with like the COVID crisis. I think that was like an eye-opening for our federal government to think about that we were using like a nonprofit to be an emergency food source. Mm-hmm. And so I really thought, wow, real estate is huge. Like, no one's really connecting farmers with, like, everybody talks about it, but no one's really hustling, right? Like, no one's really going in the ground, figuring out why they can't buy the lot, like why inflation's affecting prices. And there's no subsidies for farmers. So there's subsidies for first-time home buyers, right? Like, there's down payment assistance. Yep. In Minnesota here, we just came up with the first generation, and that's because people put policies into place that would help funding for these families. But we don't have those subsidies for farmers. This year, though, we do have the 50,000 MDA, Minnesota Department of Agriculture. After so many listening sessions, right? We have that for people who want to buy land. Yeah. And so that's like a huge step. I mean, like, before it was homeowners, but there still needs to be more. There needs to be like infrastructure, marketing, like sustainability. But I felt like part of the puzzle was there was no, whether private or nonprofit, like there wasn't anybody. There was land access navigators, and then they would have like for sale by owners that then they could access it and then kind of leave out need lawyers too. But then I think there's also room for those who are just seeking land and like wanting to drive around and understand soil fertility and understand like this is wetland, like you can't build on it because you can't put a septic, like just all of those building questions that I had to become overnight. I had to become a developer overnight too. I became a small developer. I helped one of my cousins write a small grant for a pre-development grant on affordable housing in the city. So I started learning about soil, about doing pre-development feasibility studies and looking at that. But in our culture, there's no such thing as feasibility. It's like, I'm just going to buy land and then I'm going to figure it out later. And then later they don't have water. I had one lady who bought the wrong set of cows. Yeah. She was supposed to buy like milking, meat cows. She bought milking cows.
Oh,
and
no.
So she called me and she's like, I think she's like, my cows are milking cows. And so I didn't know that there's a difference between it and they're dying and I don't have enough space. And I was like, it's not like in Laos where you just buy cows and you just graze. I said, they probably need shots or they probably need, like they need to get a checkup too, And I was like, I've never raised cows. Like I've raised chickens, but not cows. So it's just interesting. Or I had another guy who called me and he was like, I don't have water, and he's like, I bought a piece of land, but I don't have water. And he's like, I'm going to dig my own well. So, but the state of Minnesota, you have to like record your well and you have to get a professional to come drill. He's like, well, I'm going to drill it myself and I'm going to get to water and then we're going to like, and I was like, it's not like in Laos where you could just put a bucket down and then grab water. And so it's just very interesting that like, there's a huge cultural, aspect, and that I felt like knowing how to speak Hmong and English and being an interpreter, because a lot of people my age have also lost because we went to college and like we were raised, going to school, we kind of lose the Hmong language. So I'm hoping that my kids continue their Hmong, but they don't know how to speak Hmong. They understand me, but they can't speak back. But anyways, that's how I went into real estate by accident, kind of because I was searching for myself and I ended up representing myself. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so cool to see how, and just thinking about, for example, your leadership studies. I mean, it's very apparent to me when I hear your story that it has served you very well, right? Like, I think that in the advocacy role that you play, I feel like when I hear your story, you're stitching together these different worlds in a really cool way. And your translation, being able to navigate both spaces, I think as someone who's also, bilingual, I guess I can claim that at this point. That it's like you navigate these two worlds constantly, and it's so fascinating to me how with the use of language, there are things that will never perfectly translate. But you can always do your best, right? And I think that a lot of what you say about, the land access people, the folks that are trying to address this with different technical programs and such, I don't think that we have included real estate agents in the conversation in the way that we should be. And so that's why I'm so grateful to have met you and to be learning about what you're doing. I'm also learning more about real estate, but in Costa Rica right now, and just navigating that space and understanding there are so many questions around purchasing a property or an existing home that never really get talked about or included in these conversations. It's, I think, a lot more about maybe some of the strictly farming stuff.
Right.
And when I think about, for example, all of these different beginning farmer training programs that I went through and the curriculum that was included, I don't think we never talked about real estate agents as part of that process of what is it like to work with them, or what kinds of questions should you bring with you when you're looking at this new property, that kind of a thing. And maybe where might you anticipate some hiccups along the way, or whatever that looks like. So I think it's very, very cool. I'm going to pop in with a quick side note here, because as I was listening to this conversation, my jaw dropped at this moment when Mhonpaj starts to talk about her work as a Hmong interpreter. I could not have foreseen that almost 2 years after our interview was recorded, I'm going through the final module of Middlebury Institute's Spanish Community Interpreting Program. As part of this program, they offer a 3-day intensive in-person training that will help me refine my skills in simultaneous interpreting. Basically, that's when at the same time that you're hearing someone speak, you say the same thing but in the other language, and consecutive when there's a pause and then you say what you've heard. And so much more is included in this training. If you've been following my journey for a while, you may know that way back in 2014, when I was just a little wee one, I received a Peace Fellowship that paid for my full tuition to attend Middlebury Institute's intensive language program in Middlebury, Vermont. What's so cool is that almost 10 years later, I finally made the investment in my training to become certified as a professional interpreter. What I'm learning about the profession and the standard rates, though, is really putting into question how I want to put my skills to the test. I don't fit into the box of legal, educational, or medical interpreting. And it wasn't until just yesterday that I realized that my best sources of opportunity to serve in this role are right where I'm at now, in the fields of sustainable agriculture, personal growth and development, spirituality, entrepreneurship, and wellness. I know that you all, my listeners, are into that too. So here's my ask. I'm not going to ask for your money to pay for my tuition. What I am going to ask are for warm leads on any opportunities where I get to shine in leveraging my language skills for the good of humanity and the service of others. Is there an agricultural conference coming up that's looking for a keynote speaker? Are you hosting a wellness retreat and need someone to help coordinate logistics in a Spanish-speaking country? Maybe serve as a liaison between the hosts and the on-site staff and the attendees. Are you organizing a personal growth focused summit, in person or virtual, and want to offer Spanish language content? Maybe you're organizing a meetup of herbalists in Mexico and need someone to help create a landing page to advertise for it. When I think of my spirit, my gifts, my passions, and how I can bring my language skills to the table, these are the kinds of opportunities that light me up. I'll share a link so that you can schedule a time to chat with me, Or you're welcome to send a note to my team at hello@mezclada.co. Together, we can make a big difference in the world. Sometimes it's not through cash gifts, but connections. Thank you so much in advance for your help. I feel like you addressed this a little bit in talking about how especially some of the folks that you're working with are coming from maybe other countries originally, so they're not as familiar with maybe some of the permitting and that kind of thing. But I'd be curious to know, how is your approach to working with your clients maybe different or non-traditional compared to other real estate professionals?
Definitely I'd partner with like technical assistance, for them, and like the transaction that I'm working on now, they like want to know about green acres. Like they say, oh, we don't want to pay all the, like they have some idea. So it almost is like a checklist that like I always say it's unknown language, right? Like when you're buying a land, like no one's gonna, even real estate agents who don't work with land lots are not gonna know this. And then and then even farmers don't know it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they just know how to do production. So really it's like development language, right? And so when you're buying a lot, unless if you have a builder helping you, you're not gonna know, oh, I have to first do some soil boring tests. So for me, it's been kind of like reimagining and rethinking, and therefore my like new channel, Organic Living on BIPOC TV, is I feel that real estate is achieved through a lifestyle, and that you have to know that it may cause you stress or burnt out. And that, so when I think about space and when I shop with them, I actually listen to their story first, which is very different from, I think it's a buy and sell aspect. I think, and also there's like a stigma against us real estate agents, right? They're like, oh, they're just all about for profit and they're marking up their commission. And there's in our lawsuit about, non-disclosure of buyer's commission. And being a broker, I'm just like, there's a space for that. And I was like, the amount of work that I do to help a client to get ready, I don't get paid for at all. So like my clients don't know what paperwork they need. They may need records for, let's say, FSA. They need to collect their business plan. And then I would tell them, I'm like, if you're buying this lot though, you don't have water, so you'll be driving every day to this lot. So think about the mileages that you're putting into there, or what can you do initially on the lot to like bring value or help you pay for the lot. So it's almost like entrepreneurial like skill sets of like business planning that needs to be part of the discussion. And then it's also like a holistic like, lifestyle. I always say, what kind of lifestyle do you want to achieve on this lot? Like, do you want to live on the farm, be able to tend your greenhouse, or do you want to drive within 30 minutes every day and still live in the city, be close to your job? Because half of these farmers are still working full time.
Exactly.
So then like, I feel that when I get their goal and their whole entire family on board, which I feel like more like therapy, to be honest, is to get everybody on board, because we live in generational families, right? Where like you have like right now kids are living longer with their parents before they can move out, but then yet they're renting and their house size is growing, and St. Paul only required 4 people to a room if it's a 1,500 square foot home. So like our guidelines are prohibiting generational living. And so then I'm finding out that like me getting them into a bigger house, or getting them into like a house where then a lot of people could live together, then they could pursue their goals and dreams, and then their payments are not increased.
Yes.
Because rent payments are going up for them even though the house hasn't increased in size, right? So then the cost of living and inflation is affecting them. So I like to explain that to home ownership to people. I'm like, I'm not here to sell you a house, but I'm here to explain that if you don't buy, then your rental will go from $1,500 to $2,600 quickly. And then all your family can't live in this because the landlord's not going to allow you to, right?
Yeah.
Unless if the landlord's like family. So I'm finding out that I've gone through like creative financing, maybe putting a few people on the loan in order to qualify for it. So I think for me has been like the culture aspect, knowing how to talk to parents and then grandparents, and then talking to the dynamic of like in-laws living together, because maybe the sister and brother-in-law doesn't agree that they want to be untitled because they want to move out of the house, but they don't know how to tell the family, but yet they have to live together. So there's such different dynamics when you're shopping for a home. So my husband always tells me, he's like, probably took you a year ready before they're ready to buy, and then to get them to like save money, right? To understand that, okay, investing in house is going to cost this much. Like, and also our community don't believe in debt. So, but in order to build a credit score, you have to have that amount of debt, right? You have
Yes.
to like enroll in debt. So they're like, why are you having me go, get a credit card if I don't have to, so I have to retrain them and learn about like how do you build a credit in order to qualify. So it's just been like a really long journey, but I feel that like people, like I'm seeing, like I want to say since I've been real estate, I've probably helped over 100 clients get into houses, either in real estate for farming hobby for themselves or in like their first time buyer. And then now they have their house and they have equity in the house. So I tell them like your first house is not your end all house. It's like your
Exactly.
starter home.
Yeah.
But they think it's my end all, so we're shopping like it's my end all home. So I think a lot of people understand that. Like now there's equity. Now we could purchase another one, or you could live in it and pay it off or rent it out. And so then I don't think there's enough discussion educating people about real estate and then what the possibilities are. And I like to tell people, like, I believe in like the generational wealth of educating them that this is how you do it. Because if you never do, I said, if we continue renting, if I continued renting, because I rented for 15 years after I sold my 2 houses, I explained that to them. I was like, my first house paid for my college education, it helped pay for down payment, and then I reinvested into my IRA, right? Like, so like our communities don't even know, about that. Like, okay, but now with more investors, they're starting to see, and they're like, oh, look at that individual. So yeah, there's a huge like first language barrier. There's the older generation who's like kind of fading out and who wants to like now never had land but just had this business that the kids have to take over. So like how do we transition that? And then there's these farmers where like they're selling their land but like their kids absolutely hate farming and don't want to take over, but they want to like their legacy to live on this land. And so as I'm selling real estate and I see it, and there's not that happy medium of someone who would buy the lot, like a private investor who could buy and hold the lot and figure out how we could subdivide it to like these families. So I really feel like there's opportunities for investors, if they can mobilize a bigger resource like that, because these farmers, pooled resources probably like 40,000, and cannot afford a $1.5 billion lot. We're closer to the city. So I think there needs to be a way of, and also what I'm realizing is developers are not putting it in their comprehensive planning, like city and state. So like, it's not saying that to include green space, like in our development here, like there's no playground, and I'm like, the kids come to our end of the lot and then it's like our farm lot. But then I'm thinking about space and how you live in space. Like there's not really that practicality. It's just how many houses can I fit? And then if they have HOA, then they have like a community center and stuff. So the important thing is on a bigger level, like you said, like because I have an education and I was able to learn about comprehensive planning, and I worked for Asian Economic Development Association and was like lobbying for policies to change, community businesses and how to support them. I realized there is nothing. So when you go, the city councils are like going to say, well, you're not part of our comp plan. Like our comp plan has your whole entire section designed for like 45 more units. And what's interesting is even though these are wetlands and they have protections and stuff, well, I'm sure they developed over those wetlands. But then for farmers, we have very high restrictions, where we can put our septic. We have setbacks from wetlands. There's like certain species that you have to like there's so much more restrictions, I feel like. But in terms of like developers, I feel like there's probably more leniency, and they probably have somebody who could do research that could make a case that is in wetland. But yeah, I just find it interesting. Sometimes you either have to cave in, I feel like, if the planner at the county has a lot of shot callers. So like even if you have this great idea, if they already have you zoned out, like you're probably not gonna be able to pursue. So then usually a lot of the lots that we're shopping for, I always tell people that like, let's make sure that, whatever you have is zoned for, egg use.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was a big lesson that I learned doing my master's in planning, was just really understanding the importance of zoning as a tool, even that as people like myself that have that background operating in the planning space, a lot of the work that I do is more at the regional scale. And always thinking about that is, how is it that as these communities are growing and developing, that you're making that intentional plan of preserving green space so that there's, yes, recreational areas for these families, or that, you know, a certain percentage will maintain its agricultural use so that, you know, the property values are protected as well, and that it doesn't just keep pricing people out and that they have to live further and further away from their markets, essentially. Yes.
So yeah, so that's just very interesting. So yeah, I've learned a lot through this process of becoming a real estate agent, and then talking with a lot of, like, I have a farmer who's trying to like just raise her 10 chickens. So I have to call the city and be like, how many chickens do you allow per acre? And they're like, 5. And she's like, can I have a rooster? And there's only one city that we found out. I think, I forget if it's East Bethel or St. Francis, but like there's one, if it's your 2.5 acre or more, you can have one rooster. And so like we're buying real estate per zoning, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. So I was like, I might as well just take out the phone book and call the planners, or like have a website where they're like, we're the only county that allows, you know, for 2.5 acres and plus. So our shopping experience as a real estate agent is very different, right? Not all realtors are going to do that. They're just going to be like, here's your search engine, like pick which one you want. We're going to go shop. So I do a lot of upfront work. I want to say, like getting my buyers ready, especially with limited English, or if were speaking English, it's like a generational family. So kind of coaching them through the process of home buying, and then like really thinking about their long-term goal. Like, do you guys want to build a house on this? So we have to make sure these questions are answered, or we contingent upon soil borings. But nobody knows those. And like you said, as real estate agents, they just like to leave us out of the picture, because they're like, if we get anybody involved, we have a lawyer who's very good who could just draft a PA. And I'm like, that's totally cool too. But I think for me is, I just feel like I wish there was someone like me when I shopped who like gave me all those questions, because definitely I had sandy soil. I mean, we didn't do soil borings, but I just did soil test, and we have no organic matter, but it's really sandy, which is great for cucumbers this year because of the rain. But yeah, it's just interesting how much soil improvement that we still have to put into the lot. They had it under hay. But that's also the science and the beauty of farming, is like the fact that you could take a piece of land and like put earth back into it, you know? So,
Yes, bring the life back to the
Yeah.
soil. Yes. So one of the things that we had talked about before was sort of mental and physical capacity as it relates to choosing your market channels. And I know sort of holistic living is a very big interest and passion of yours. So I'm curious, what advice do you have for people to choose those market channels well and avoid burnout?
I want to say that you almost need to be in a career that pays you well to be able to have your side hobby as a farmer, to be quite honest. But when I initially chose, I was running a CSA, and we had a customizable CSA. So, and then we had deliveries and we had a drop site. So we ran that for a year, and that was definitely burnt out, because we would grow stuff and that they customize, and all of the rows of lettuce weren't, but we had backup farmers market. And so for me, is like having a big family was crucial, or having the volunteers there to help you, because I had, you know, these family members were in charge of farmers market, and then these family members were charged in wholesale, and then I was in charge of the CSA, right? And so for me, it was like really good planning, and then getting commitment up front. So if you don't have those production managers, like really the roles to really carry out, and then the skills, because you can have a really big operation, but if your people aren't skilled, it could take you forever to weed, or it could take you forever to grow. So the beauty of it, it was like I had really skilled, you know, before my dad passed away, like I had 2 really skilled farmers, right? My mom, my dad, my sisters, and we, as a big family, so as all of us keep getting married, right, the skilled workers kind of left. And our kids now, you know, we're all like in different areas, and everyone's working. So it just became unrealistic, right, to be a family operation. We still do the farmers market now, but to like find your niche and find a high value crop is very important. So like our tomatoes are really good in our high tunnels, and our Hmong herbs. So like we sell to the hospitals. So like you have to find a niche market for you that you focus. There is that going to be cut flowers, but that area. And then there's also marketing, and then like your story. You know, I always tell people like, what's your story? Because they're not buying the stuff because of this product itself really, but they're really buying into you and who you are and what you stand for and your values. So I always tell farmers, I'm like, whether you like it or not, Weebly has a free page and I have it too. And I don't want to pay for a website, but I'm like, go create just a simple website for you so that they can land and know about your story, where they could sign up for your CSA. Or they could start out first like having a farmer's share. I call it, where it's like whatever I have, you're going to buy for me for a week. And you kind of like start a following that way. So we've been in business for 15 years and we really didn't launch our own CSA. Like we were part of the Good Acre and Big River Farm CSA for all those years, but we never got our own, right? So when we did, I think we recruited 150 members. Yeah, wow. It was a lot of members. And they all still want to come back, and like they find that we're at the Good Acre, and then Big River Farms dissolved their CSA. So think about it. We had our own, plus we supported 2 CSA. So that's a total of 1,000 members. That's 500 so that means that we weren't doing enough production for all of them, but we still had accounts with them where like they were still ordering our excess. And we still had food left out in the ground. Like, to imagine, like, because you always have to over-plan.
Yes.
So this year we really cut back in terms of, like, markets. Like, we kept just the wholesale accounts, which was easier for us with kids and managing. Because then you picked it, and then we got rid of this. It was really hard for us because we loved our CSA members. We are thinking of maybe bringing it back, but we're a little bit hesitant because if it's a customizable one, and let's say they want 1 box of tomatoes and you missed it, it's almost like you either reimburse or you have to go pick it in the middle of the night. Whereas the CSAs that are just farmer shares are easier because then they're getting whatever. We love that. There was one too that we did, I forget what the share was called. There's Ridded Shares or something, where they wrote a grant and they just ordered like 50 boxes and we just packed it and we gave whatever we want. We love those. We're like, we should be like them. Like, why are we making it hard for us? And so we also delivered, right? So like we delivered straight to their door. And so we were trying to make it very accessible, but then we loved pickup. So like I think our next move is like pick your own farm or come to the farm and pick. And we're not too far from the city. We're like 20 minutes. So we thought maybe our next move is going to be CSA share, where you either pick your own or you could just pick up a box and it would be just a farmer share. So yeah, as we're strategizing, or like, do we not farm and do we partner with a nonprofit where like there's farmers who want to expand? So my dream is like, I would love like a goat farmer to make cheese on my farm and like someone to raise chickens. And we just work as a collective. And then I really like the Big River Farms program where like they gave like a 1/4 acre to each farmer. And then they would order like 3 crops from each. And so that way they could continue to grow their farm. Then they had the opportunity to go build their business plan. And so I think this year we're rethinking about how are we going to be able to create a market for farmers and then yet also not burn ourselves out, but then work as a collective. But knowing that if we're bringing more people on board, that's also more, burnt out because you're training. So we're a little bit smarter. So we talked to some of the nonprofits and we're going to put together a game plan. But yeah, definitely I'm like, you need people and you need skilled people, and you get burnt out when you don't have those skills. Then you end up picking up for everything. You're doing the deliveries, you're picking, you have crop loss, especially this year and last year, the weather, Mother Nature has worked against us, specifically because of climate change. And people think, of course we call it the dragons are coming out of the ground in Hmong culture, because if it rains a lot, that means like the dragon gods are upset. And this year we've had lots of rain, and so we weren't able to even get in ground. So like our lot looks like Minnesota Zoo right now. We've got all the animals, especially with the development moving in, they took refuge at our lot. So I was like, maybe we just people walk through our lots and find different animals, either a skunk, a crane, maybe a woodchuck. Like we've got all the animals in Minnesota living there. Cougar, coyote, like I'm like, we're in Minnesota. Bears, so just crazy. But yeah, I joke with everyone, like, yeah, we probably make more money charging people to see the animals in our lots and we kind of and then the rabbits think we're their friends now. So like they come out and they think we're raising our kale for them. They're eating it in front of my mom and she's like, the rabbit's looking right at me. And I was like, I think it's becoming domesticated at this point. Like they just love our farm. And so Yeah, we've had quite of a spin last year with drought and this year. So if anything, I feel like farmers feel like quitting this year. I think like Mother Nature really tested people, especially at the food group. I think they said they had at least 30% loss of like accounts, not because all the cucurbites just died. Like they had too much rain and then it was too humid and then they just turned yellow and like shriveled and they did. We don't have any more zucchinis or cucumbers for the rest of the season. Usually by this time we still had more. So I don't think people understand the seriousness of climate change and that like we're really affected. And last year there was wildfires and I developed asthma. So I was like, my health was getting compromised. So when you talk about burnt out for farmers, we work full time and then go to the farm. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing showings and then I'm running there to make sure. So really, I took a step back this year to take care of me. I just was like, hey, we're not doing CSA. We're just doing farmers market, just one farmers market. We're not doing pick your own. Everything went into weeds. We're going to put up one high tunnel. I mean, that was our goal, like, because we don't have the resources to do anything else. So the high tunnel is this upcoming week. We're going to do a Go Connect. And I think we figured that we can't take the chances on outdoor growing anymore because all of our stuff indoor did beautiful, in the high tunnel. So we're like, we have one high tunnel that we haven't had the resources to put up. So let's put it up and then go indoors. So definitely burnt out due to weather, due to careers, like having a flexible enough career to allow you to do that. And, people can't do it. Like all of my farmers have full-time jobs and then they come in the evenings, they work until 10 p.m. And then Friday nights we're there till like 10. And then we're waking up 4 o'clock in the morning to go to farmers market downtown. And some of them have 3 farmers market throughout the week. So, and then just know that our leftovers get donated at the end of market. So the food shops loves it because we're getting lots of food. But I think the farmers are, like, if you really did the math, like we did a cost analysis, they're really just making maybe $3 an hour. Like, yeah, after all said and done. Because some markets, if it's a rainy day, you're making anywhere from 300 to 400, maybe 600 if it's a good day. And then if you're making $1,000, the lack of produce that you're not selling afterwards, it's still a loss, right? So I think people aren't accounting for lost produce and donations. So yeah, it's farming itself. It's hard to tell people that you can't get burnt out for sure.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point about that. I often like to think about the whole cradle to grave and cradle to cradle model when it comes to food production and how you're designing your business model and thinking through, like, for example, there was a grant application that I helped write. I think this was maybe 2 years ago now. It was when the local food purchase assistance program funds were coming out. What was cool is that it did get funded. And the way that we had designed the whole system was that anything that was left over from the farmers markets that these farmers were selling to would be purchased from them through the funding source, and then that money or that produce would end up going to the food pantry. So there was that intermediary step of generating additional income for the farmer that I think is lost in so many ways, no matter if it's you're selling direct through the farmers market or other kinds of market channels. There's a lot of, I think, lost opportunity for food waste and thinking through how are we tapping into people within the value added space that see that as an opportunity. I mean, I dream all the time about working with more entrepreneurs and basically just bringing them all of these food systems problems and saying, make a business out of this because there's opportunity here.
I honestly think so. I always tell, our dream was like initially with the Good Acre was we were like, there's so much left over that we need people to come pick it. Because first we're like, we don't have enough labor. So if you guys can pick it, you could have it. And then like turn it into the value add, right? So therefore they put in the commercial kitchen. So, some of the stuff like kimchi and stuff has come out of it and they bought our daikon, you betcha, right? So that was great. So we loved growing like kimchi for them, like our daikon radishes, our Napa cabbages. So like you said, there's so many chefs out there and there's so many people who need food in general, like that are hungry, that like my frustration is that, like you said, our government system, that's like food security that we need to, it should not be like a nonprofit running it, it should be a priority part of their planning to say, hey, I remember applying for a job for something. It was like a food security job. And they asked me, like, what is your challenge? I was like, my challenge would be that we would do something radical, that we would have to radicalize the system so that way we are taking care of our food security. That if these, and I was like, think about it, the food hub, the Good Acre was because some really wealthy, family decided they were going to invest in it. It wasn't the government, it wasn't like a nonprofit. It was an investor family, and somebody came up with the idea and said, hey, we want to create a CSA and buy from local farmers. And yesterday, before I went to Amy Klobuchar's and the food discussion, I believe it's like $1.9 million of food that's purchased from local food hubs from here and so I gave all the stats of just from BIPOC and then from local farmers and Western Wisconsin, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, think about it. We had all, like, without the food hub, let's say we removed this like 5-10 years ago when the Good Acre came about. If we just took that away, think about the loss, right? And then they came up with Leaf, where they gave just $5,000 to a farmer just purchasing produce. And we ran out of that funding. So I was thinking, the other day I was sitting in the small developer workshop for affordable housing, and we had about like 3.5 trillion, or is a billion, $3.5 million that was still left on the table that nobody went to go apply for affordable housing, right? And I was thinking to myself, I was like, wow, if we still have that budget and we were running out of those $5,000 increment budgets for Leaf, right? Like, just from a standard standpoint, me not knowing how politics works, and we were not able to purchase more produce from those farmers to feed, and yet there's still a hunger. So I'm thinking to myself, if we still have a hunger issue within our school districts and our kids are still going home hungry and there's still like homelessness, like, but yet there's so many vacant, I was like, there needs to be a solution between the two. Because I was like, affordable housing and subsidized housing, and even with homelessness, as I was working, I was like, they need to be in treatment centers, where they have staff that is watching them, because they're not mentally in a ability to make radical decisions, because some of those units get burned down, right? And I would be the interpreter who goes through those homeless shelters, and and I think that was just the one commitment working for, like, as an interpreter for I went from like homeless shelters, I interpreted for kids and their parents, and then just seeing the health, and then and it's like a trickle effect. Like, they couldn't apply for housing, they didn't have food, and it's always housing and food. And I feel like that's what I'm in, is I'm basically saying, hey, while everybody's sleeping, we're going to continue to harvest, even though we're really tired, and even though I'm anemic this week, I'm still going to go out and harvest, because no one's going to harvest. And I think at one point, like, there needs to be it has to be a bigger level, a state program, that they need a huge wake-up call. Everybody, our elected officials, no matter what party you are, I'm like, if you cannot create a food hub that's ran by the city, state government, and I said, if the food group ever runs out of money and they're a nonprofit, we are doomed. We don't have, because they're considered the emergency food shelf, and then they rebranded to the food group. And I've been with them for 15 years, right? We were initially Big River Farms, and then now we partnered with the food group. And I speak in terms of we, because I've been like their 15-year farmer that graduated. So I just really feel that, like, the little bit that we have on earth today, like, if we don't make the right changes, like, and we don't implement it in our systems, like, it's going to get lost, like, nonprofits fold, land turns over, and our kids, and Mother Nature's already showing us. And I said, until we can't get our citrus fruit, because I remember one year there was no oranges at the food shelves at like Cubs or any of the grocery stores, because there was frost, like in Florida. And so, or like in Hawaii where it starts snowing, and I don't think people know the seriousness of our carbon imprint, and that climate change is happening, and that, like, farmers are seeing it. Like, we have so much mosquitoes at our farm because this year frost didn't happen, and then it rained so much that the mosquitoes are like, we don't have enough, other insects taking care of the mosquitoes. And so for us to be farming this year was so hard. Like we're getting bitten so much, and like we're hoping that we're not, going to get anything, and especially with like the different types of ticks now too. Like the tick season was horrible. So I'm like, who would want to be a farmer? Like with ticks and then especially to strip us away from the resources. So small scale farming in the state of Minnesota is like unknown. Like right now with the disaster, because we're not larger farms, they're not going to reimburse us for our loss. Whereas like bigger farmers and larger scale farms. But yet I was like, here's some statistics to prove to you that small scale farm works. Because initially the argument was small scale farms cannot feed America, right? But I'm like, well, we're feeding and we have access every day, and there's still access in the field. And so I only need 1 acre to generate like 100,000 of revenue, right? If you do it correctly. And I'm like, in Canada, I was taking the market gardener program. It's Jean-Pierre, I think his name, or Jean-Paul. And he's doing it, and he's teaching farmers how to do small scale farming, sustainable agriculture. But like I told my husband, I was like, we don't have a pack shed. Like we're constantly working up I don't know if you heard of the pot liquor fund, but he's basically a guy who learned how to like put a bunch of investors together and make funding just crazy available to farmers. And he basically stated in that workshop, he said, we are like fish on dry water. Because fish in water doesn't know they have plenty of fish, but we're like fish on dry land. And I thought about that. I'm like, he's like, does it feel like it's hard for you to breathe? I was like, yes. Does it feel like you're constantly working up? Do you feel like you have to get every degree in order to even get to where they're at? And that's equity, right? Equity is where they're just giving you that stool so that you can level, so that you can see over the fence. We're not even asking for a handout like freebies. I'm saying we just need and here's our return of economic reinvestment in the community, right? And I just thought to myself, I was like, wow, like, that was really powerful to me, that I'm like a fish, because I have to get literally my husband had to become a financial advisor. He had to go get his carpentry degree so he could build my high tunnels for me. And then we have all the licenses. I had to get my master's to see if I can get the job so that it could pay me more, so that I could continue farming, and to move up the corporate ladder. We did everything to the T, but yet we just are still paycheck to paycheck, because we can't sustain the farm business because real estate and, the lending is what's going to pay our bills, right? So you continue to do that. So I'm like, the truth is there needs to be sustainability, right? Like we're constantly trying to put up the infrastructure, whereas a bigger scale farm, they go in with a business plan, they show them all of the stuff they need. The pre-existing farmer already has the books, right? To prove that, hey, 20 bales of hay pays this much, and this much corn. They already have the business booking to back them up. Well, I have to create a business with no land, right? And so if not for the incubator, I wouldn't have had to pilot my, the incubator farm at bigger farms. So if you think about it, if I never had land to incubate my idea, how am I ever going to go to the banks to tell them this is a successful business plan, right? So you have to prove financing all the time. So I had to go to them to say, I'm broke. I'm like broke enough to be, qualified for the loan, but then I have to also have a successful business plan. So how do you do that, right?
Yeah, it's a mess, I think. And I feel like being able to bring the lending community and banking community on board and into this arena as well, and help provide education around some of this stuff is a very important step. I'm realizing more and more as I try to expand my network and really understand deeply my customers' problems and, what are farmers going through, who are all of the people that they have to interact with from the day that they decide to start a farm business to when they get to sign the papers that they own this property or whatever it is. I think, yes, the lending and financial community is a really big part of it that are not necessarily always empathetic or understanding, and it's no fault of their own. It's just that this is not something that they've been required to understand. And a lot of people like us, we come to them with interesting and creative ideas that have never been done before.
Right.
And that doesn't fit within the box of how they evaluate an application or, your credibility, your character, all of those things. I want to close our conversation with a question that I always ask because you are on the Transcendent Farmer podcast.
Okay.
I would be curious to know, what does a transcendent farmer mean to you?
Transcendent. Wow, it sounds to me like spirituality. Like, so when I think of transcendent, I think of, between earth and human. Like in our culture, we believe in the ancestors watching over us, and that what you do good, it comes back to you, right? And as a farmer, I feel like farmers are really lucky, like for their crop season. Like there is a reason why they continue to do that, and it's actually heals them, right? So the earth actually heals us and it grounds us, but they don't know it. So like when people are going through depression or they're going through grief or loss, I find that people find themselves and they don't go through trauma of farming. So when I think of transcendent, that has to do with the healing process of yourself, and it has nothing to do with money. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so like money will pay for the lands that we're not stressed. But if a farmer can have everything paid off and just farm and food and just give, because farmers, they're patient and they understand unconditional love. Not saying that the rest of humanity don't, but they understand that they have to nurture this plant all the way up until it's ready to be eaten. And then they have to go share the fruits of their labor. And being transcendent in that whole entire process to me means like they're grounding themselves and they're patient and they're loving and they're caring. And nobody's willing to do that. Like right now, if you were to raise your hand and go into the field of humanity and say, who wants to become a farmer? Like they're going to be like, no, thank you, and like have them do it for a year. Like people at Big River Farms, like that's why you go through incubator. Mm-hmm. Like for me, I was like, oh my gosh, I quit it. I think every year we quit. Like my mom and I are like, this is our last year we're farming. Like midway season the next year you grow again, and you just never give up. And so to me, transcendent means that you have to have an experience with your spirituality, earth, and with your purpose in life. And it's not, and the end result may not end up in a monetary value, but it's like what is healthy for you. And sometimes if you get into it in the wrong way and you overexhaust yourself, it could affect your health. So I think being transcendent evolves around a fine balance between all of that.
I love that. Yeah. And it's a constant lesson and practice is, I think farming really tests your personal limits, yes. Mm-hmm. both mentally and physically. Mm-hmm. And I think I've thought about this a lot in terms of comparing it to yoga, for example, or meditation, where it's like you just have to show up, mm-hmm. Because you can't control the outcome of what's going to happen. You can't control the thoughts that are going to flow into your mind.
Right.
You can be an observer of those things, mm-hmm. and you can either choose to wholly engage yourself and maybe have that take over everything that's going on, or you can step back and recognize that, there are forces beyond us that are at play, mm-hmm. and the most control that we have is how we react to those things.
Yes, mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's so true. I feel like it's a form of meditation, definitely. I think farming is, I think my mom and my sisters, like with grieving and what they're going through, when they're there, they're in their mode and it gives them a little bit of time to step away from all emotions in life, from whatever argument they may have at work, and their oneness with like the plant, them, and their task, that nothing else matters. And to someone, they're like, oh, she's so, like people view my mom like, oh, she's such a workaholic, but they don't realize that that's her healing. Mm-hmm. Did that make sense? And so I totally believe what you say, but thank you so much for that. I don't even know if I covered what your intention was, but I'm just so honored to be part of this series for sure.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for your time and everything that you're doing. I cannot wait to share with more farmers about everything that you have going on. I just know that they'll be really excited to, find a friend and a partner and a cheerleader in what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you love this conversation as much as we did, feel free to share the love by passing it along to a friend or fellow farmer, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. Until next time, friends.